I am so excited to introduce our keynote speaker, Catherine Gibbons, co-founder and executive director of 1211 Partners. Kathy is a wife, mother, author, writer, advocate who has overcome the dark world of sex trafficking. After years of living in silence, Kathy decided to journal what happened to her as a way of dealing with the surreal experience. That journal became a book. That book became a stage play. Partnering with multiple organizations, Kathy's goal is to raise awareness, fight for those who are being trafficked, and mentor those who have overcome it. She is now using her voice and expertise to inspire others to join the fight against such a horrible atrocity. She has presented to faith-based organizations, educators, students, medical professionals, law enforcement, politicians, and leaders from all sectors of society. She's trained nonprofit organizations and individuals who aspire to become better advocates in the field of anti-trafficking. In 2018, Kathy received an invitation into the Oval Office to witness a bill she advocated for signed into law. In 2021, Kathy joined the United States Advisory Council on Human Trafficking by presidential appointment. During her time as a program director, Kathy developed a trauma-informed restorative care program for adult survivors of trafficking. She is now co-founder of 1211, an organization committed to supporting individuals who are on their journey to thriving. As a leader in the field, Kathy continues to provide training and consulting to various groups committed to the fight against human trafficking with a focus on underserved populations and marginalized communities. Please welcome Kathy. And I know some of you will have questions. Please use the Slido app. You probably have seen it on your schedule. But if you go to Slido and enter 154-7432, that'll be the most efficient way to submit your questions. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you so much for having me again for the third time. I think I just can't stay away at this point. It's amazing. Thank you, Dr. Morgan. I appreciate you so much. I have the honor of opening the plenary today, and my discussion is going to be focused around what the theme is: finding our way home, helping youth find their way home. And as we think about what that means, I know that we can talk about residential care facilities, we can talk about emergency assessment centers, which are all very, very important. We need these things. But I want you to reimagine with me what home could truly be. What if home was community? What if home was fulfilling that sense of belonging that most youth, most children, most individuals that experience human trafficking desire? What if home was the feeling of acceptance for individuals that are historically marginalized? What if home was having a voice and having people listen to that voice? We often talk about, well, we want individuals, we want to empower youth, we want to empower children, we want to empower survivors to find their voice. Spoiler alert, we have a voice. We've always had a voice, but no one was listening. So it's not necessarily we're helping youth find their voice. We're giving them platforms and providing platforms for them to use their voice. I often share a little bit about my personal experience just because it just makes it easier, right? Especially when we're talking about something like human trafficking. And I'm going to be real with you. If you've never heard me present before, I apologize in advance because I tend to be very candid, very raw, very real, because I want people to understand what we're dealing with, right? So human trafficking, as you know, guys, it's all over the news. It's everywhere now. And we need to be paying attention to it. We should have been paying attention to it. But what's happening is sometimes it is highly sensationalized. And so we're missing what human trafficking truly is from the perspective and from the lens of those who have actually lived it. Starts with the movies, right? Starts with Hollywood. It starts with all of these things coming out now. It starts with media, especially social media. If you've seen the zip ties and all those things, those myths that have been circulating, not to say that some of those can happen, absolutely, but because it's a highly sensationalized topic now and everyone's getting on board with it, everyone's getting on board with it. Human trafficking, the topic. But not everyone is getting on board with the individuals that are experiencing human trafficking. It is a people problem first. We're dealing with individuals and not just a cause, not just a topic. This isn't just a movement. This isn't just something to show up to and, get credits on. And it is literally, we are standing in the gap for people, for youth, for children, for individuals, adults, both women and men, boys and girls who have been affected by human trafficking, or those who are at risk. I love the prevention lens because yes, we can totally get ahead of human trafficking, but first we have to understand what the root causes are. And a lot of those things are vulnerabilities, right? Vulnerabilities are what traffickers seek, not necessarily people. It's the vulnerabilities that people have. So what are some of those vulnerabilities? I'll share a little bit about my own experience growing up and just follow along with me. And maybe you can identify some vulnerabilities that I experienced. In fact, again, if you've never heard me present, I apologize in advance. This is a partnership, so I make you work a little bit. I'm so sorry. But as I'm speaking, I would love for the next just 2 minutes of what I'm going to share, if you identify a vulnerability that I experienced in my personal life, can you just raise your hand? If it sounds like a vulnerability, raise your hand. Don't worry, I won't be offended if you raise your hand at the wrong time. This is all, again, participatory. This is all us engaging and learning together, okay? So, I came from a wonderful home. I was born in Canada. Don't you dare raise your hand. I was born in Canada, and I had a wonderful life. I had a wonderful, amazing parents. They were great. Then, as adults do, conflict happens, and my father decided to leave the home. I was at a very young age. Awesome, I see hands. Absolutely. However, my mother, she stood in the gap, and she was amazing, and she was like, okay, I'm going to give you everything that you need, me and my siblings, just so that we won't have that void, right? Because my father decided to leave at a very young age. So my mother, being as thoughtful and loving as she was, thought that the best thing for us to do was to leave Canada and move to Texas. Again, another vulnerability. Because I was young, I think at that time when we made the move, I was about 13. You already know, 13, raise your hand. That's a vulnerability all in itself. At 13, I was trying to figure out life. I was trying to figure out what my purpose was. I was trying to figure out what Barbie dolls I wanted. Did I still want to play with Barbie dolls? Would boys think that Barbie doll? I was trying to figure out my life. And so I came and moved to Texas. I moved to Texas, y'all. You can raise your hand on that one. It's okay. I moved to Texas, and if you ever heard the saying, everything is bigger in Texas, it's a real thing over there. It's a real thing because expectations were bigger. When I left, I was playing with dolls and things like that. I had childish interests, which I should have at that point because I was a child. But when I moved to Texas, I was asked questions when I got into school, I was asked questions well, are you dating? Do you have a boyfriend? Where are you from? I came with an accent. I don't know how because I wasn't saying y'all like I should because I was Canadian, so we didn't say that. And so I had an accent, and I had a Jamaican accent. because my parents are Jamaican, so I was raised in a Jamaican household. So here I am in Texas. I was considered like a foreigner, right? That's what they used to call me in school. And so I just wanted to fit in. I just wanted to maneuver my way into this new surrounding so that I could fit in. I considered myself a chameleon. A lot of you guys must have got tired because already there's a bunch of flags, right? There's a bunch of red flags. There's a bunch of vulnerabilities. But my life wasn't horrible. That's the thing. A lot of times we are looking for the worst of the worst. When we talk about high-risk populations, we know that foster youth are at the top. We know that individuals that experience food insecurity, poverty, marginalized communities, race plays a factor into some of this. So we know that there are certain communities, right, that we know. We just know that they're at risk to experiencing human trafficking. But do we know about the middle class? Do we know about the upper class? Do we know that people that live in the suburbs are equally at risk, right? Do we know that this happens to all people? And I think that's where we miss it, because we're looking for those larger and those more obvious populations. Again, we have to pay attention to those populations. We have to pay attention to those children that come from impoverished households or low-income households. We have to pay attention to those children that come from severe abuse or in their families. We have to pay attention to those children that may be struggling at home. We have to pay attention to those children that come from communities that have been historically marginalized. We absolutely have to. But we can't just focus on the obvious, because we're going to miss all the children around us that are experiencing human trafficking, like myself. I didn't come from that. I didn't come from a terrible home, I would say. Not in my eyes, anyways. I didn't see it that way when I was younger. But it was absolutely a vulnerability. And when my trafficker approached me, he knew and identified all of those vulnerabilities before I even could, right? So they were in front of our eyes. They were in plain sight, the vulnerabilities were. Unfortunately, in high school, because of my chameleon nature and because I was just trying to fit in, I did experience a horrible sexual assault that I didn't tell anyone about. I didn't go home and tell my mother what happened. I didn't file a police report because I was silenced, because I didn't know that my voice mattered, because I didn't have a place. So I buried it. And when I was approached by a trafficker later on in life, he unburied it. He identified that, oh, I'm going to use that. I'm going to use the fact that she came from a fatherless home. Even though she had a loving father, he separated. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to use the fact that she has no idea about anything about Texas, anything about America. I'm going to use that. I'm going to use the fact that her mom's always at work because she has to provide. As a single parent, she has to provide for her children. I'm going to use that. So I step back and I ask you, in thinking of and reimagining finding a way home, I had a household. I had a physical home. But while all of these vulnerabilities were stacking up on top of each other, where was the community? Where were teachers? Because I was in school. I was actually an honor roll student. I was involved in community service. I did all of the things. And sometimes trafficking is hidden behind all of those good things. When we talk about educators, right, we're looking for, and you should, we're looking for bad grades. We're looking for unexplained absences. We're looking for electronics that they bring to school, extra electronics when you know their family can't afford that. We're looking for new clothes. We're looking for change in attitude and behavior. But what if the child is actually performing well? What if this child is actually involved in after-school programs? What if this child is actually involved in community? What happens then? And again, this is not putting blame on anyone. This is because we're learning together and we're trying to figure out how we can help these children that are in plain sight. Like I said, I was a part of the community. But where was the community when I needed community the most? Where was home? Outside of a physical home, where was home for me? Who was there for me to say, something bad happened to me? Because I guarantee you, if I was able to talk to someone about feeling out of place or about the sexual assault that happened, about all of the things that, the fears that I had and the insecurities that I had that I couldn't even articulate at that time. But if I could have just sat with someone who said, hey, how are you doing? How's home? And just dig deeper into what I was experiencing, I guarantee you that the trafficker that I met later on in life, he wouldn't have those vulnerabilities to prey upon because someone else would have helped me to work through those vulnerabilities, right? That's prevention. Seeing, listening, paying attention to. We do have a voice. Children absolutely have a voice. So in terms of helping children find their way home, it's about a partnership. Yes, even though they're young, even though we know that their brain is not fully developed, even though we know that their moods change on the minute. I'm a parent of a 14-year-old girl. I know, right? And sometimes it can be challenging to figure out, is this just regular teenage stuff, or could this possibly be signs of trafficking? Usually I have a presentation and there's a Venn diagram that we have. And on one side, it's dating violence, and on the other side, it's grooming, the process of seduction for trafficking. And when you look at it, there are so many blurred lines. Even when you put healthy dating up there, right? Like youth and teenagers that are in a dating relationship and are trying to explore what relationship looks like, when you put it together, there's so many blurred lines. So we don't know. We really don't know unless we're listening, we're seeing, and we're partnering with those youth, with those children to figure out, hey, how are you? We use that term so loosely, right? When someone says, hey, how are you? What do you guys say? I'm going to ask you, hey, how are you? Fine, we're fine, I'm fine, right? And youth, you'll be lucky if you get eye contact with that fine, right? I'm fine, just don't talk to me. So how do we partner with that? How do we partner with youth that do show some resistance? I can tell you that resistance is usually fear-based because trusting is really hard, especially if you experienced any kind of trauma, not to mention any kind of exploitation or trafficking. It's usually fear-based resistance. So for those of you that do work with youth or will work with youth that have experienced human trafficking, when they say, I don't want your help, when they are resistant, when it appears that they are themselves the troublemakers, as we've labeled some of them, it's usually fear. I don't know you. I don't trust you. I don't know if I can ever trust anyone again because the person that I once trusted exploited me. So how do we recover that relationship? A lot of times, and I love that you came in, Dr. Sandy, and said that we don't use the term rescue. We're trying to really stay away from that word because for so long we've come in with the savior mentality. We've come in with the cape on, wanting that youth to quickly recover. Like you need to be rehabilitated today. You're away from your trafficker, good. Healing starts now. Actually, it's sometimes scarier when you leave your trafficking situation. For me, yes, bad things happened out there. But when we talk about trauma-coerced attachment, especially for youth, trauma bonds, otherwise known as trauma bonds, that thing is so real. When you're out there and you're in this relationship and you're in this trauma bond, everyone else is the enemy. And another spoiler alert, guys, for individuals that experience human trafficking, not every day is a bad day. So what society sees as, oh my gosh, this is a horrible, terrible situation. Yes, it is absolutely a crime. It is horrible and it is a terrible situation. But from the perspective of one who is living it, every day is not a bad day. You want to know something? I actually laughed while I was experiencing human trafficking. I actually laughed some days. I smiled some days. I had fun some days. I felt valued some days. So when you take someone from that situation, you remove them and you say, everything that you've experienced ever was bad and we're here to save you, they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. What do you mean? You've taken away my family system. You've taken away my community. And now you're coming in saying that you're going to change my life. What does this even mean? Guys, even sometimes the abuse becomes something that an individual thinks they need. That trauma-coerced attachment is serious. And so when we come in and we say, okay, we're going to help you find a home. We're going to help you. We're going to provide for you. It really takes just meeting individuals, meeting youth and children right where they are. We're not trying to change anything about the person, meaning their thoughts, how they feel, their value system. We're not trying to immediately change any of that. The only thing we're trying to change is their situation. And we do that by offering and extending a buffet of services. Here is help. This is a service that may be able to help you. Would you like this service? How about you try this service? Right? And I know when we're talking about the justice system, there is mandated, especially when they're on probation and community service and all the things. I understand all of that. But we have to try to change our language and our lens a little bit to at least give them the option to make some kind of decision for their own lives. Or else, guess what it feels like if we're making all the decisions for them? Feels like exploitation all over again. And that's tough. And that's where we get the resistance, right? Because I feel you're saying, well, no, you need to give me your phone. I'm going to take your phone for 60 days. You need to go to this rehab. You need to do this. I feel like you're trying to control me. So then that's where the resistance comes from. It's fear-based a lot of times, right? No, I'm not gonna let you take my phone. I'm gonna run. That's what I'm gonna do because no one is ever gonna control me again. And so we have to create a partnerships with individuals in order to serve individuals and serve them well. So I'm gonna back up a little bit and I'm gonna talk about, we are very familiar with, many of us are anyways, with the different types of trafficking. There's multiple different types of trafficking. I've noted some here. So some forms of trafficking. One way is the pimp or the trafficker. We know that that's what we see, that's what we hear most about when there's a trafficker, a third party that is taking this individual's money, forcing them into sex or labor, and profiting from what they're doing, right? So stealing their freedom for profit, basically. That's pimp-controlled trafficking. And then we have gang-controlled. We have familial, which is very sensitive, especially for those of you, especially for educators, because how do you come in between the trafficker, aka parent or family member, and say, we have to take you away from this system because it's dangerous for you, when this person has bonded with, not only bonded with, but has been raised with the very person that has been exploiting them. So we got to get creative in our approach to try to, again, give the individual voice and, elevate their voice, give them a platform for them to express and have dialogue with why we're removing them from this situation. If we just come in and remove them from the situation, it's also often setting them up to be at risk to be re-exploited. Peer-to-peer trafficking is something too, because a lot of traffickers will groom youth to then be traffickers themselves. Even when when youth are removed from that trafficking situation or removed from their trafficker, they will still have these tendencies because they're taking back control. I'm going to be in control this time, so I'm going to be the trafficker. Does that make them a criminal? Not really. Are they breaking the law? Yes. But does that make them a criminal? No. They were victimized and groomed to do this, right? So peer-to-peer is another type of trafficking. And then we have non-pimp trafficking. You may have heard the term renegade or just being out there on your own or survival. This is where an individual feels forced or compelled to engage in exploitive experiences due to the lack of basic need. So if I don't have food, or if I can't get employment, or if I don't have community, I feel forced, right, to have to do this. So this is where the system then, or harmful systems then become the traffickers. Harmful systems become the traffickers. So youth are typically recruited because of the lack of a sense of belonging. When we talk about basic needs, a lack of basic needs, lack of acceptance, they don't feel heard, they don't feel seen. And that's what traffickers prey upon. So then, as community members, how do we come in and reverse that? How do we be the person that can provide sense of belonging, acceptance, voice, basic needs? When we figure out that part, that is when we can definitely prevent trafficking for individuals that are at risk. We've got to come in at the root causes. We've got to jump in where they are suffering the most and be that for them. A lot of times when we approach trafficking, we're looking at trafficking as an isolated experience, and we try to put the Band-Aid on that, right? So we're just focused on the trafficking experience itself. This person was exploited for sex or labor. This person experienced pimp control, so we gotta address that. That is not a holistic approach to ending trafficking, to preventing trafficking even. A holistic approach is, what environment do these individuals come from? What is their family system like? What is their family institution like? Who is their community? Right? What is their education like? Who are these people? And when you want to answer those questions, what do? We get to know these individuals, right? We get to know them. We build partnerships and relationships with them. That is literally the only way that we're going to prevent trafficking, is by preventing the circumstances that push people into trafficking. This is going to be hard to hear, but that's even true. We know that trafficking is typically male-dominated in terms of traffickers. So what are we doing to prevent boys from becoming traffickers? It's a hard pill to swallow. It makes people uncomfortable because we don't want to talk about traffickers, because they're harming children and they're harming people, which is absolutely true. But how can we prevent them from harming people? How do we end trafficking if we don't address traffickers? Because they're the problem, right? So in addressing human trafficking, we have to look at it from a holistic approach and figure out, what are these individuals experiencing prior to their trafficking situation? And then if they experience trafficking, what is it that they were lacking that caused them to have this experience in their life? So what kind of support can we bring to them? I can tell you from personal experience that my trafficking situation would not have ended without the power of community. I tell people all the time, I still have mentors till this very day that don't even know that they were my mentors. They were just good people. Some of them provided assistance through just asking me what I needed. Some of them saw me through school. Some of them took me to church. Some of them were just there when I needed them. Regular members of community that did not know how much of an impact they would have on my life. If I was to name all of them today, I don't know how long I would be standing up here. But it's because of them that I'm able to stand here and share with you all of these things, right, that I've learned through my personal experience and learned throughout my journey, because they were there. So how can you then impact someone else that has experienced human trafficking? How can you impact the next speaker that will be up here standing in front of you because you've helped them overcome trafficking? What kind of community member can you be to someone else that needs you in this moment? The big question we always ask, right? Well, how can I don't know what I can do. I don't want to go kick down doors and things like that. It's literally just seeing, listening, partnering. I often ask people, what do you have in your hands? What is it? Are you an amazing educator? Great, we need that. Are you an amazing mentor? Do you believe that you have the commitment that it takes to walk alongside someone long term? Great. We need that. Do you work in the legal field? Great. We need that. Everyone has something in your hands. And together, collectively, that's home to someone. That's home. That's how we help individuals find their way home. That's how we help children find their way home, by coming together, joining arms, and actively listening, seeing, partnering with these children. I know from personal experience that it takes a community. When we started 1211 Partners back in Houston, it wasn't just to start another nonprofit. Lord knows, it was not to start another nonprofit. But we saw some gaps. What we did, we got a bunch of individuals that have experienced human trafficking together. We got them in a room and we said, okay, what's happening? Because when the pandemic hit, a lot of these same individuals that had gone through programs and did all the things, right? And were now successful, or what we consider successful, and working on their jobs, and they came a long way. They worked really hard to get where they are. Those same individuals were going back into the life of trafficking. So they were at risk again for being exploited. So we got them in a room and we were like, well, what's happening? Why? You've done so well. What happened? And the number one theme in that room, in that conversation, was lack of community. It wasn't money. It wasn't education. It wasn't the justice system. It wasn't any of that. The number one theme was lack of community. So as you've seen, I've kind of emphasized community, right? So we responded to that by creating this mentorship program for individuals that have gone through restorative care residential programs, to walk with them long term, long after they're reintegrated into the community, right? Because they didn't have anyone to call. Can they call you? Can someone call you? Can someone pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm struggling? Can someone pick up the phone and say, hey, this person DM'd me on Instagram. Is this safe? Do we have relationships like that where youth can trust us enough to reach out if something is happening? We talk a lot about red flags and identifying the red flags. Some of the red flags I mentioned earlier, if there's a behavior change or an attitude change, or if, kids come to school with like extra cell phones and electronics, or they're wearing different clothes, or they have different company. We talk about all the red flags. I think one thing that we need to focus more on are the green flags. What does healthy community and relationship look like? Can we be that for someone? That's how we prevent. That's how we prevent our youth from experiencing human trafficking. That's how we help youth find their way home. Thank you so much.
Q&A time. Okay. So your Slido number is 154-7432. And we have about 15 minutes. And I do not have the app working right now. So someone is going to feed us the questions. Usually I get this set up the night before, but something didn't work correctly. But that's okay, because I actually do have a question about the green flags for community. My question, because I have lots of green flags. Okay, you guys know me. Most of you do. How many times have I said no to you? Besides my husband. So how do we have a healthy community with green flags but boundaries?
Oh, that's a wonderful question.
I knew I'd get an A.
Yeah, that's a really great question. Boundaries is important when you're helping, specifically when you're helping youth and anyone that has experienced human trafficking, because when we come out, and I say we, as identifying as an overcomer of trafficking, but when we come out of our trafficking situations, we are looking for that relationship, right? We're looking for that relationship, basically a replacement of what we had. So it's not necessarily that we know what healthy is. We're just looking for a replacement. So if you can meet my needs, you're my replacement. If you say yes to me every time I ask for something, the only thing that you've done is replace what I thought this trafficker should have been doing. So the things that I desired from that person or from that group of people that exploited me, I'm now trying to get that from you. I was trying to get healthy from this person, now I'm trying to get healthy from you. And healthy to me means because I was being told no so often and because I was silenced so often, it means now I just want to hear yes. I just want to hear you say yes. I just want you to do what I think we should do. And so I know you have questions. This is a wonderful question because I just talked about elevating voice, right? And I talked about giving platform for voice and making sure that we're partnering with these youth in the decision-making process. So the balance comes in with relationship, understanding what they've been through and seeing them as humans versus seeing them as a project that needs to be saved or seeing them for their trafficking experience, right? Because if we see them for their trafficking experience, we'll always say yes. But if you see someone for, okay, maybe you have some manipulation things going on, or maybe you've been manipulated so much that you really don't even know that this yes could be harmful.
That is so
I'm going to
good.
say no. Yeah.
Because now we're having a mom conversation.
Yeah.
If you're a mom, do you say yes to your kids all the time? That would not be healthy. Yes, you can have candy. Yes, you can stay up late. So boundaries are an important characteristic of home. Okay, this is one of my favorite conversations, and we have to have more of it, but I'm going to go on. I can see the questions. I just can't moderate them now, just for my team. So we're in pretty good shape. What are some of the marginalized youth you were referring to, and how can we help marginalized youth in church settings? Absolutely.
So I mentioned foster youth, immigration youth that are going through the immigration process, or migrant youth that come here, they're severely at risk as well. Individuals that have gender identity differences, and so they struggle with their sexuality, with their gender. Those individuals are highly at risk as well. Then we talk about race. So black and brown communities are always at risk, higher risk. We have data that shows that young girls, black girls specifically, are disproportionately overrepresented in terms of those who experience human trafficking, specifically sex trafficking. So those are just some of the higher marginalized, underserved people that I was referring to.
Okay. Now, there's lots of questions showing up here. Will you share any successful demand-focused initiatives you've encountered, such as working with men and boys or women who traffic or exploit?
Absolutely. There's a wonderful organization. There are tons of organizations, but there's one organization specifically, and it's in Texas, and there are different models of this. So I'm just going to use this organization as an example, but it's called Demand Disruption. And what they will do is they will go out and on stings, which that's a whole different topic, but they'll go out when we have these operations, and they will interact with the buyers. And so that interaction is like, hey, because Texas right now, I don't know if a lot of people know, but it's a felony now to buy in Texas, right? So these individuals from this organization will say, hey, here's jail time, here's an option for recovery. And so if they choose the option for recovery, they may still get the felony, but they have to go through the recovery process. And it's classes and courses on, redemption and just all of the things that they need to be healed from. So they talk about pornography, what led them here. By the way, a lot of the responses that we've seen, that we've heard from these buyers are like, yeah, they all had a direct link with pornography. That's where they started before they started buying. And so they'll have to go through this recovery curriculum, and they have to pay for it themselves. And guess where the money goes? The money goes into restorative care programs directly impacting survivors of trafficking. So that's one of the models that are really great, is just to see the men and the buyers, the demand as like they have a problem too. I talked a little bit about earlier that we can't just address trafficking tunnel vision on just the individuals that are experiencing it and their experience. We have to talk about the trafficker, and we have to talk about the buyer, because it's this whole system. And if we're going to dismantle a system, we have to address all of the parties in that system.
So talking about the traffickers, how could we address traffickers who are women? Would it be possible they were victims for trafficking? How do we bring that out?
Yeah, so it's very possible, but I don't want to mislead anyone into thinking that it's only men have bad intentions, and men converted all these women traffickers, these female traffickers, to do this. Yes, it does happen, but just as we are trying to bring traffickers to justice, it's funny because when we say traffickers, immediately we think of a male, right? We need to start treating those women and those female traffickers the exact same way. How we do that, though, because we know that boys are exploited too, and forced into labor and sex too. So, but how we do that is to, again, look at the story, look at the timeline of how they got there. If an individual formerly had a trafficker in their past and maybe had some, charges that we can directly say, oh, this person experienced trafficking in their past, then we can say, was this person groomed to be a trafficker? I can tell you from personal experience and a lot that I've worked with as a minor, when I was younger, I had to go to strip clubs. He would drop us off at strip clubs, and he would say, come back with the girl. And if we didn't come back with the girl, it would be severe consequences. So in that case, in that moment, was I a trafficker? You know me, right? You know that I'm an overcomer of trafficking, but in that moment, was I a trafficker? That's something that we got to ask ourselves. If something would have happened where law enforcement would have came, I would have then been seen as the trafficker. But I wasn't. But this can all, just because I'm a woman doesn't give me, oh, this is just your experience. It could happen if I was a male, forced by a trafficker to go do that. So I think we have to see, again, this is a people problem, so we have to track the whole timeline and look at the whole story when we're addressing that.
Okay, so what about drugs? There's a couple questions here. Would you say most victims are into drugs and that's what leads them into trafficking? Or are they introduced to drugs because they are being trafficked?
So drug-induced trafficking is another trafficking experience all in itself. So drug-induced trafficking, yes, can happen if there is a substance use disorder historically, and then this person is then trying to meet their needs and get involved in a trafficking situation. So the trafficker can then prey upon that disorder. However, For instance, in my case, I did not have substance use disorder. When I was trafficked, this particular trafficker did not want us on hard drugs all the time. So he would allow, certain pills and things so that we can endure the night or endure the day. But he was very clear about, no hard drugs. So it's a tricky question because it's really on the trafficker. So yes, some traffickers force their victims into using drugs. Some traffickers prey upon victims because they have a substance use disorder.
Would it be safe to say that community-based programs like Big Brothers, Big Sisters can help prevent trafficking since it directly connects youth to community?
I think so. Absolutely they can if they have the proper training to look at the signs of seduction in the grooming process. I think a lot of these organizations, which if I could just have a magic wand and just, okay, God, this is my one wish, it would be that we all work together cohesively. So a lot of those programs work in isolation. They're focused on mentorships. And yes, we're going to mentor youth to be great, which again is addressing the green flags and the healthy boundaries. However, we've buried the red flags, right? So we're one way or the other versus meeting in the middle and saying we need all of the training in order to identify if someone is potentially being groomed or seduced into a trafficking situation. I believe that even in those programs, a lot of children are missed.
So I feel like Kat and I are having a conversation here, and you guys get to listen in. So I'm going to drill down on that question a little bit, because when I talk to organizations about coming and doing training, they often have so many things that they have to do. And the same thing for our teachers in Department of Ed. And one more training is just going to overwhelm them. And I've been actually keeping a notebook that I have a page, Smart and Strategic. And that is from the foreword of the book my friend Kim Yim, I don't see her here yet, and another friend put together during COVID called Ending Human Trafficking. And Ambassador Richmond wrote the foreword and said that he, as a prosecutor with DOJ, a victim told him that the only thing her trafficker couldn't take away from her was the ability to pray. And she did pray for her own end of suffering, but what she really prayed was that people would not just have distant compassion, but would take smart, strategic action. Everybody say smart, strategic, action. Okay, that was not very good. Let's try it again. I'm giving you another chance. You're going to help them. Smart.
Smart.
Strategic.
Strategic.
Action.
Action.
So some of us, academics, I can get lost in the research and never actually go out and do something. But for these nonprofits, for schools, where they're already overwhelmed, sometimes with legal or required trainings, how can we begin to be more strategic? Because so many of the issues are overlapping. Your Venn diagram, for instance. So how do we just insert 7 minutes in a normal training program? What would that look like?
I would say make it fun, and that sounds very simplistic. But if it is overwhelming and we're going in with all of these terms and now this is another thing that I have to learn, it does not become a part of my lifestyle. But if you make it fun, something that I'm already doing, so let's just say the arts, and you make an artistic display of what human trafficking really looks like, and not try to pack everything in that 7 minutes, but say we'll be back, next month with another 7 minutes, and then we'll be back the next month with another 7 minutes. I think a lot of times these trainings are just so jam-packed. Now, I'm no teacher, I'm no judge, but I think that when you learn to be a teacher, you go to school to be a judge, you go to school to be an attorney, does the learning stop there? No, right? When you go into your classroom, you're constantly learning because this is a part of your practice. This is a part of what you're doing. You have to keep learning. And so we've isolated, human trafficking, again, this is just another crime, this is a movement, and separating the community aspect of it. Because if we saw this as a people problem, it would just come naturally in what we do every day, right? So learning in terms of training, if I implement like 5 minutes a day into what I'm already doing and what my day looks like for me, then it doesn't seem so overwhelming because I'm now taking bite sizes, and bite sizes eventually lead to a full plate over time. I think we overload in training settings. We try to fit everything into one PowerPoint, and that's just not how people learn. That's not how youth learn. That's just not how we learn. That's not how we retain, right? I think it takes practice and lifestyle.
So you served on the White House Advisory Council, and so you're familiar with a lot of the different national organizations. The caveat here, though, is that there are probably thousands. I lost track when I was doing counting a few years ago, and I got up to 928 organizations. So I know you can't know everything, but are there organizations you would recommend getting involved with to help provide community and combating human trafficking?
Yeah, so we know, or most of us know some of the bigger names, like the Polaris, GFIMS, and we know some of those bigger names. What I would say, honestly, is where you're located, what is in proximity, like what's around you, what organization exists around you, and get involved with that organization. There is a wonderful organization I think your team just reached out to me about. It's called United Against Human Trafficking, and they focus a lot on awareness and prevention and education, and they do it in fun ways. So it might be like, we're going to see, this museum today, and we're going to talk a little bit about human trafficking in terms of historically what it meant as it relates to the environment that we're in. So thinking of innovative ways to teach people and to get people engaged and involved, that would be a wonderful organization as well. And then, the Polaris with the National Human Trafficking Hotline, that's an easy way to get involved because of their data that they put out. A lot of their data is good because of the hotline numbers that they're getting. So I am very, as you can see, hesitant to name too many organizations because I'm going to be quite honest with you. There are a lot of organizations that are not data focused or evidence based, and they're doing it off of emotion, and that's not going to end this problem, right? And so when you're looking to partner with organizations, just see where are they getting their research from. Do they have the data? Even if it's survivor led, right? Because anecdotal data is good. When you're talking about, I'm working directly with individuals that have been impacted by human trafficking, do they have survivors on their board? Do they have survivors on their team? Do they have survivor-led curriculums and programs? Those are organizations that you want to get involved in. And if they don't have survivors on their team, oops, but let's see at least if they're doing the research and where they're pulling their research from. So when you're looking for those organizations, those are kind of the tips that I would say. Again, not going to drop too many names because I'm still doing a lot of research myself with building. And a lot of this comes with relationship, too. I partnered with amazing organizations, and then in the end, it was like, that was all wrong. Let's try it again. And that's fine. You just keep partnering with people just to learn, right?
Okay, so you guys are getting the hang of Slido now, and now there's a lot more questions. But it's almost coffee break. So one question between you and your coffee here. My phone timed out. How would you teach younger children under age 12 to be aware of human trafficking?
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad whoever asked that question, just give yourselves a hand. Just saying, because that is amazing, because we are so scared to talk about this topic with our children. Trafficking doesn't just begin with the trafficking situation, right? It's a progressive process that traffickers prey upon. So if we're not talking to our children about healthy boundaries, that's where you can start to answer your question. Talk about healthy boundaries. You can even start talking about this, guys, at the age of like 3 or 4. Let me tell you, you're not going to use the term trafficking, big scary monster trafficking. We're not going to do that. But you can talk about you can talk about boundaries, and this is my body. You can talk about, I don't want to say what I usually say because I don't dare to say, but you can talk about body parts and say, this is a body part that no one should touch. This is a body part that you can say no to. You can start having those types of dialogues, and as they get older, you as the parent, you as the provider or the caregiver can determine, is this child, can I now introduce the next thing to this child? So you have to determine their development for you, but I know for me, I get in there and we talk about healthy boundaries. And if you make it comfortable when they're young and when they're small, like, no, this is my body part, then you can start talking about, okay, when they're a teenager, you can start talking about, hey, pornography is out there. This is why we're not going to do it, right? Because it's harmful. And then you talk about by the time you get to trafficking, it's like, oh, well, this is what we've been talking about. And it's not a shock. I think a lot of the problem is that we've waited till, trafficking situations happen, or, our teens, now you're 18, now we're going to talk about trafficking. What? They've seen everything on social media. Like, we can't guard them from that. So I think the conversations as far as healthy boundaries for the young people, for the babies, start talking to them about what that is and keeping themselves safe.
Big hand for our friend Kathy.